Some people have been asking about latency, for recording with this thing. Let's explore that a bit. So I'm in my DAW Reaper, and you can see up in the bar here, toolbar here, we're at 48K, 24-bit, 8 channels in, 8 channels out, 512 samples. This is my default settings for when I am mixing. I don't want low latency. I want playback that guarantees no dropouts. Here, I have 13 milliseconds input latency and 13 milliseconds output latency. And even for 90% of my tracking, this is still the setting that I use because I don't really use virtual instruments. I record everything analog in a sense. So if I'm playing my guitar, I'm playing through my Helix, I'm getting my playback through my Helix's modeling and stuff like that. I don't use the software plugins to do it or anything like that. So all the sound is created from my physical hardware units. Therefore, the latency when recording is irrelevant most of the time. However, every once in a while, I want to play a little bit of a keyboard part on my MIDI controller, or my drummer uses MIDI drums, so we need to get that going. And when he's using MIDI drums, we're recording through TuneTrack, Easy Drummer, something like that. So we need to have lower latency for tracking. So what we do there, let's explore that. So in here, we can go into my audio device settings. Now I have the Helix Stadium XL is selected up here. You can see the sample rate is at 48K, and this is where our block size is at 512. Why do I have the 48K, 24-bit kind of thing? If we look at my system settings for the Helix, this is the audio device's system settings preferences of Mac. On the hardware is 48K and 24-bit. I just keep it at that. That's the native format of the Helix, and in this case, the Helix Stadium XL. And that's the format that is my favorite format. If I had the ability to choose many different internal formats, this is still the format that I would pick. It means that whatever digitally is happening inside my Stadium is going to be passed through to my DAW, to Reaper, with 0 conversions. So it's 48K, 24-bit inside the Stadium. It remains 48K, 24-bit inside Reaper. So we saw at 512, we're at 13 in, 13 out. For a drummer to be tracking drums through a plugin like Easy Drummer or Superior Drummer or something like that, 13 in, 13 out, that means 26 milliseconds of latency to the drummer. That's never going to cut it. So let's see what we have at some other settings. We go to a block size of 32 samples. Now we've got about 4 milliseconds in, about 3.5 milliseconds out. Add these up, we have a total of 7.5 milliseconds round trip latency. Most people can't detect anything less than 10. If you say you can, that's fine. I don't want to argue with anybody. I'm just showing you the numbers. You can decide if these numbers are good enough for you or not. Now, it is possible, we can bump this down even to 16 samples, see what that's like. Now we're at 3.5, 3.3, so we were at 7.5 milliseconds for 32 samples, and we're now at 6.8 milliseconds round trip latency for 16 samples. You could go lower or not. It's good for you to see what I am working with here, so you can get a sense of how this might compare for you. So you can see here I'm using a computer from 2017. It's a 27-inch iMac, 5K screen, Retina quality. Processors, a 4.2 gigahertz quad-core Intel i7, and it's got 32 gigs of RAM. The graphics are kind of irrelevant. Hard drive, all that stuff doesn't really matter. But this is what my computer is. So if you have a faster CPU, better CPU, you have more RAM, less RAM, all that stuff is going to play into what kind of latency settings or how fast or how low you can get these things set to. It's really determined by that. What I find is even at 32 samples of latency, that the 7.5 milliseconds round trip, it's responsive, but it does create a few dropouts. You know, the age of my computer, the speed of my computer, stuff like that. It can't quite do the live input without having dropouts. So what we've actually settled on as a process is 64 samples of latency, or 64 samples for the block size, and that creates the 4.5 in, 4.3 out. So ultimately the round trip latency is now 8.8 milliseconds. So it's under 10 milliseconds, it's under 9 milliseconds, just barely under 9 milliseconds. It's only 1.5 milliseconds slower than the 32 samples of block size, and I don't think anyone's going to hear 1.5 milliseconds of latency difference. I just want to remind you all that if you just round off the speed of sound, sound travels at about 1 foot takes 1 milliseconds. So having an extra millisecond of latency is like taking a baby step further away from your amplifier or sound step. If you go 1 foot farther away from your speakers, you have added 1 milliseconds of latency. When people talk about being able to sense different latencies, and we're talking about having 9 milliseconds of latency here, that would be like standing 9 feet away or about 3 meters away from a drum set. If you're standing 3 meters away or closer than 3 meters or closer than 9 feet to a drum set, and you're not hearing unreasonable latency just in the real world, then 9 milliseconds of latency is totally fine for tracking purposes, because you're going to have the headphones on, they're going to be right on your ears, and we found that it's no problem at all. So I hope you've enjoyed this dive into the kinds of latencies you might be able to think about or expect with the Helix Stadium XL. I would say that the numbers I'm getting, they may vary by a few milliseconds depending on whether you're on Mac or Windows, depending on what kind of drivers you might be using. If you're on Mac, you don't need any drivers at all because it's a core audio device. But ultimately, even though the numbers will be this very similar or the same from computer to computer, with a faster computer or a faster machine, what you can do is use lower block sizes. So you may be able to get away with that 32 block size or the block size of 16. You might even be able to try block size of 8. I've never even tried a block size of 8. But that's what you can see. You can see the differences are minor. So I hope you all dig this, and have a great weekend, and don't forget to rock out with your Helix and actually have some fun.